Welcome back to the NutriMedical Report, and the first hour on Wednesdays is the LaRouche Foundation Hour. Of course, primarily Harley Schlanger, many other top experts in the foundation, and I agree wholeheartedly with their approach of analysis and specific plans for the, I want to call it the technological, spiritual, and cultural ascension of mankind, which is the initial gospel of Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus, and it's being walked out by, in the sense of what, modern geopolitical prophet in Lyndon LaRouche and his wife, and of course the many members that see the positive vision. As it says in the Bible, for lack of a vision my people perish. Well, the vision is Nawapa. The vision is a Glass-Steagall Act. The vision is a government where we have a world with strong nations, not weak nations, with a globalist agenda 21 to reduce the world population. The goal is a world without war, a world without pollution, a world without famine, and without economic devastation as a means of control. Harley, we've got lots to talk about today. Of course, the ethanol mandate, we're going to talk about that. LaRouche PAC action video, the cancel of Wall Street's worthless debts, and the Hamiltonian credit system, which was talking about increasing man's productivity, which is the original vision of the Founding Fathers. Let's take it from the top.
Well, let me start by saying there are two, you might say, giant wars going on right now, both of which could lead to the removal of Obama. The first one is the very, I would say, courageous resistance going on by some in the Congress who have halted Obama's intent to provide arms to the so-called rebels in Syria. And this is something that came up yesterday. The Senate voted in a secret vote not to authorize the funds. And for the first time in a long time, it looks as though key members in Congress are saying that there will not be a commitment of the United States to offensive action anywhere in the world without having a public, open debate in the Congress. And if Obama is found, as I believe they will find, to be arming the Syrian rebels in spite of this vote, then he's in violation of the Constitution and could be impeached. Now, secondly, is the fight over Glass-Steagall. And this is taking on even more importance because of the chaos in Europe right now, where the European Central Bank and the European Stability Mechanism are counting on continued funds coming from the U.S. Federal Reserve to the banks of Europe to keep them in a bailout, even while they're trying to move up the date in which they're going to legalize the bail-in, that is, having banks allowed to take money from their depositors. Now, the Glass-Steagall fight in the United States continues to move ahead step by step. We're now up to 68 co-sponsors of H.R. 129 in the House. And what Lyndon LaRouche has done in a series of real breakthrough videos over the last few days is to up the ante on how the Glass-Steagall policy and the credit policy together would bankrupt these globalist banking forces that you're talking about. And if I may, I'll just very briefly emphasize that one of the things Lynn said is that as soon as Glass-Steagall is passed, then banks like J.P. Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Bank of America, and others, Citibank, will have to sit down with regulators who will say to them, okay, open your books and show us your debts. How old is this debt? How far back does it go? What's the collateral for this debt? And of course, with derivative debt, there's no collateral. And much of this debt goes back to the pre-2008 period, meaning it's been kept alive by the bailout. And what LaRouche said the regulators would have to say at that point is, well, as of next week, all of this debt is wiped out. You can try and sell it and get whatever you want, but it's no longer going to be backed up by the federal government or by the Federal Reserve. It's your debt. You have to either eat it, sell it, or just write it off. And once you do that, then we'll allow you to function as a commercial bank if you wish, or if not, you can be an investment bank and try and sell it. And so that's quite simply how we wipe out these globalist financial institutions, which otherwise have a stranglehold over governments.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, They do that with lobbying, whether it's legal or illegal. In countries like Canada, it's illegal to have lobbying. In America, it needs to become illegal. We need to make certain that transnational globalist corporations and banks can't control our politics by buying off our politicians. And the firewall between Glass-Steagall, the speculative banking, and real credit systems is the firewall that will destroy the beast.
Well, and that's what people are beginning to get a sense of. If you go back a year ago or 2 years ago when you and I first started talking about Glass-Steagall, because that's when LaRouche brought it up as a solution, actually in 2009, very few people knew it. They knew what it meant. They knew what it was. Very few. Many remembered it as something that had been repealed or something that used to work for banks, but there was not a real understanding of it. Now, I would say a growing number of people know what Glass-Steagall is. At least they know it's a separation of commercial and investment banks, but they still don't really understand what it would mean. And so we have to accelerate our educational program to get at least a significant minority of the population to realize that what Glass-Steagall means is a regulated banking system under which credit can be generated to create real jobs. Now, I meant to send you something which I guess we didn't send this morning, but there was a report in U.S. News and World Report this week that said that only 49% of the adult population that could be working in the United States are presently employed. And of that, 40% of them are making what are considered low wages. So that means 40% of the employed workforce in the United States is below livable wages. And more than half of the adults who could be working do not have full-time work. Many of the jobs that Obama has created that he's so very proud of are part-time jobs. And, of course, we now see more and more companies moving to part-time work so they don't have to buy insurance, this mandated insurance for their employees.
Exactly. So what we have is a situation where Obama is a master of part-time, destroyed full-time work. Now he's kicked the can down the road for the employer mandate of Obamacare, which basically would blow completely after the gun-grabbing attempt last year, blow completely the midterm elections for the Democrats. Any Democrat, and I've talked to a bunch of them, they can't in a straight face actually defend Obama. No Democrat can defend Obama.
In fact, we were just in the Congress today, and one Democrat pulled us aside and said, there's not a thing that he's done I can support, but I can't come out and say something until others in the party do. And we said, why not? And he said, political survival. And we said, what good is it for you to survive in the Congress if you're doing things against the interests of the country?
Well, they may not survive, actually. The point is, when the midterms elections collapses, the 2016 election will be a total decimation, and all the Republicans have to do is get their act halfway better, which means put the nation first, get rid of lobbies, put a rational healthcare system together that actually can be affordable, get rid of a foreign policy which is interventionary, supporting al-Qaeda terrorists, which we know the Benghazi affair is one that they double covered up. We know that the IRS and these others are trying to kind of target their enemy groups. This is something that should have got Obama impeached already. But I'm certain he's already done acts in terms of supplying arms and technology and equipment to the al-Qaeda terrorists that already have crossed that line that you mentioned earlier. And I'm certain that once it's disclosed, Obama will be impeached before the 2014 elections.
Well, it should happen, and it's just a question, you say the Republicans to get their act together. If it weren't for the Republicans afraid of Obama, we'd already have him out of office, because if the Republicans made it clear that he's committed constitutional violations, Democrats would join him.
I have a little different twist. I think he's so incompetent, the Republicans are smacking their jaws, hoping he'll stay in office to increase their chances of winning 2014 and 2016. They're counting on him.
But it wasn't because I didn't know enough.
Harley, we talked on the break about opportunistic behavior. Basically, both the Republicans and Democrats should bipartisanly be trying to remove Obama. Let's talk about opportunism. I really think that the Republicans are being opportunistic by leaving Obama in place where any other previous president would have been impeached long ago.
Well, you're right. I think that a lot of them have this idea that there are two aspects to it. One is the Republicans, many of them believe that the worse the economy, the worse the situation for people, the more likely they will be to vote against the incumbents, in other words, against Obama in the next election. And this is not so different from how Harry Reid and Pelosi viewed the Bush administration. You know, certainly Bush and Dick Cheney had done quite a bit of unconstitutional activity, including the way they got us into the war in Iraq, for example. But the Democrats said, well, before the 2004 election, let's leave them in there, let's not oppose it, then it will help us win in 2004. And then when it didn't happen, they protected Bush again up through 2008 with the idea that that would make the Republicans so unpopular that the Democrats would win, and that's exactly what happened. But here's the problem. If both parties act like opportunists, as though the whole point of politics is to win an election, rather than to serve the interests of your constituents and the nation, then you've lost the country. And in fact, if you go back to the Nixon precedent, although the Democrats were extremely aggressive in the Watergate committee going after Nixon, it was the Republicans, a couple of them, in particular Howard Baker, who had the courage to go into Nixon and say, Mr. President, you'd better leave. Now, where is the Howard Baker of today in the Democrats who can go and say that to Obama? Now, when Howard Baker did that to Nixon, he wrote about how difficult a decision he had to make, because he said many Republicans were afraid that this would harm the Republicans and make them lose the next few elections. But what Baker said is that he was afraid instead that if Nixon stayed in office, he would so damage the nation that Republicans would never get elected again. Now, I think that's the point here. Obama has done substantial long-term damage to the United States with his economic policies, his Obamacare policy, and really importantly also his siding with Al-Qaeda as the so-called anti-terror policy. On the one hand, killing off some alleged Al-Qaeda leaders with drones while arming Al-Qaeda in Libya and Syria. So
right.
The long-term damage from this was pointed out, I think I mentioned this last time, there was an intelligence assessment report from the German Interior Ministry as to why the German government would not participate in a NATO arming of the Syrian rebels. And they said they have ample evidence that there are European jihadists in Syria who will benefit from the lifting of the arms embargo, who will therefore have access to surface-to-air missiles, other kinds of sophisticated weapons that will soon show up in Europe to be used against the governments of Europe. And this was also seconded by a British Defense Ministry report. Now, you have
That's
the
pretty stark,
irony
isn't it?
of Cameron and Obama pushing for arms to the rebels, the jihadists in Syria, but their government's not letting them do it. Now, in the meantime, of course, I think Obama and Cameron are providing weapons through the Saudis to the so-called rebels in Syria.
I still think that qualifies for violating the rules that were set up in this. What's the name of the author of the bill in the Congress?
Walter Jones has
Walter
two
Jones
bills.
bill, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And then
so in
there's
other words, I believe that they've reached
joint,
that criteria already.
Well, there's a resolution then also by Rand Paul and Mike Lee on the Republican side, Rand from Kentucky and Mike Lee from Utah, and then the Senator, I can't remember his name, the freshman senator from Connecticut who's a Democrat, and Udall of New Mexico, a Democrat. So you have a bipartisan resolution in the Senate. But what happened was that they voted on an appropriations bill. And in the appropriations bill, they wrote in a ban on weapon deliveries to the rebels in Syria. And so that's why the Obama administration is frustrated and, in fact, quite enraged right now, because their plan for a bigger jihad in the Middle East has been stymied. And also, this Snowden affair and the Obama reaction to it, it shows how crazy he is. Are we going to go to war against Bolivia and Ecuador now, or Venezuela, simply because they're saying that they're going to defend the rights of a man who exposed the evil corruption of the U.S. government?
Well, I had an interesting discussion the other day with a gentleman by the name of Eric, who's ex-military, and he says he's a traitor. He's going to release secrets on the lists of agents. I said, well, he doesn't release anything, actually, other than say we're all being spied. I said, maybe the manner in which, but I said, I'm going to ask you a question. Do you think the current whistleblower laws and the action of the current administration would allow whistleblowers to actually come forward and still be breathing and have a pulse? And he said, looked at me like, well, I don't know. I said, well, how about you don't know means you're dead? And not only that, we have Obama has added further layers to the Patriot Act, adding other sections of Patriot Act 2, including National Defense Authorization Act, the Expropriations Act, etc., which is an executive order. I said, what you have is a situation where you have a turnkey totalitarian state where whistleblowers are now terrified. The reason why they're pursuing Snowden isn't because he's released anything classified, because we've known for years that everybody's being surveilled. I've said on my show for years, in fact, I presented in 1999 to 42 cities in Israel, spoke to millions of people on Prophecy Club, have had my show here on this network since 2005. Many other experts, Alex Jones, Jeff Rentz, many other experts on all kinds of other hosts in this network and elsewhere have made clear statements with public documents by whistleblowers that made statements that are really no different than what Snowden made. What they're trying to do is have a reign of terror to say, if you're a computer techie or a whistleblower, don't even think about talking. They want to have a reign of terror right now, and Obama is like a gangster running the government like a Chicago gang. And people need to get that idea. Don't believe the lie that he's a late-night TV host, which he presents himself as, reading his teleprompter, crossing his legs, and acting really cool. No, Obama, number one, I love him. He's fantastic. He'd probably be Conan O'Brien. He's probably funnier. But the Obama 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever else is out there, these are monsters. And Obama is like a nascent Adolf Hitler. And Linda LaRouche nailed it. We have a situation where we have a socio-psychopathic person with a devoid of conscience. We read a letter yesterday, U.S. Marine Corps pastor, who actually talked about the Benghazi affair. And Obama is freaking dangerous. He needs to be in a padded room with a posy jacket on and a long needle with an antipsychotic deep in his muscles. He's crazy. Crazy as a coot, as they say in psychiatry. And if you don't restrain this maniac, we're going to go to World War III, the economic devastation of his green agenda will destroy America. We're going to talk about that when we return. Well, Donald Fagen's song is correct. It's a glorious time, but, you know, I don't think whether it's in real business. I was watching Downton Abbey, and the new son-in-law from the eldest daughter that married, he actually has a business clue. His father-in-law is a numbskull. And a good example is Obama really couldn't run an ice cream shop on a beach in the middle of the summer. Neither could his progressive so-called communist colleagues. What you have to understand is the little Hamiltonian credit system, without the innovation of America, what made America great, as de Tocqueville said. America is a godly nation, it's a free nation, it's a creative nation. It's a nation that can take half the resources and make twice the world economy. And this whole situation is really very solvable. A lot of the big lie is that none of these problems can be addressed. And then we have the crazy things like the ethanol mandate, literally designed to kill millions. And they're pushing it in Australia. I get reports all the time from Margaret, one of the nurses down in Australia, who sends me literally sometimes 2 or 3 times a week update reports of the craziness happening there. And by the way, even just getting rid of July or Gillard didn't fix it, because her replacement isn't any better. We have a crazy situation with Obama.
Rudd is committed to the air, land, sea battle regime that Obama has set up for our new policy in Asia, which is going to get us into a nuclear war with China, even though the Chinese have no desire to have a war with us. And what Obama has done, he established the Darwin, Australia naval port as a Marine barracks. And the Australians are, the ones who live in Darwin are kind of happy to have the Marines there because they have some money. But the rest of the country is saying, why the hell are we inviting U.S. Marines to be staged in Australia? Aren't we a sovereign nation anymore? And the answer to that is, no, you're not a sovereign nation. You're under the British Commonwealth. And it's the British Commonwealth that invited those troops there.
Yeah, in
and
fact,
it's the
that's
British
what the situation is for America.
Namely the Queen that wants a war with China.
And, of course, her functionary, her servile minion is Obama. In fact,
exactly.
The latest movie is called,
exactly.
out there in the theaters for kids, is called Despicable Me 2. And, of course, the lead bad guy, who's not really a bad guy, his workers are all called minions. Well, Obama is just a minion of the Queen.
If you go back to the period before World War I, you'll find that Edward, the Prince of Wales, the oldest son of Queen Victoria, who was the Prince of Wales for about 40 years before he finally became king, his job was to assure the continuation of the British Empire. And one of the things that he did was that he worked a deal with Japan, which was a growing empire in the Pacific. Japan had just become an industrial power precisely because of their alliance with the United States. A man named Erasmus Peshine Smith, and you can go check him out on the books he's written. Peshine Smith was an American economist who went to Japan and taught them the American system, the same way Henry Carey, who was his colleague in the United States, helped Bismarck come to understand the American system to allow Germany to develop. And the British were afraid that if you had American system methods in economy in Germany, France, and Russia in Europe, and China and Japan in Asia, then the British Empire, which was based on using these countries for cheap raw materials and cheap labor, would be broken apart and defeated. So King Edward, or Prince Edward, who later became King Edward VII, I believe, his whole goal was to build a series of alliances that would pit countries against each other. And in Europe,
that's the whole game, isn't it?
Entente Cordiale with France in 1903, and then the Triple Entente bringing in Russia after the defeat of Russia by Japan. But in Asia, it was to build Japan up as a military power, as an empire, and to egg them on against Russia and China. And, of course, the Japanese defeated the Russians in the War of 1905, and then they started actually in the 1890s to chip away at China. Now, that's exactly what the plan is for the British Empire today, using Obama as the front man. That's what this air-sea battle regime is about. That's what the anti-missile systems, they're not aimed at North Korea. By the way, did you notice that they missed the other day in their test? The anti-missile system did a test from Vandenberg Air Base, and they missed the rocket they sent up. So if North Korea had the capability to send these rockets toward the West Coast, it's not clear we could intercept them right now. So, again, you have the old Chinese slogan of the United States is a paper tiger. Well, we're not a paper tiger. We could do a hell of a lot of damage anywhere in the world, but a lot of the damage would be to ourselves as well.
Yeah, in other words, if America starts a war, it'll be the end of America.
Well, we already have two wars that we can't finish. You know, if you look at the Afghan situation, we've been there more than a decade now, and Obama and Karzai had a very contentious discussion the other day where Karzai, Obama's saying, well, look at all the Americans who have died trying to help you become a nation. And Karzai said, well, why are you conducting secret negotiations with the Taliban, which supposedly you overthrew in your original invasion? And Karzai made the relevant point that if you're going to bring the Taliban in the government, you'd better damn well make sure the Afghan government is involved in the discussion. So Obama's going behind the back of our so-called allies to
why he's doing that, though.
With Taliban who behead people.
The reason why he's doing that, real simple, is he wants to maintain the drug routes. So Taliban don't shoot at our drug routes coming out of the area of Afghanistan.
And that's how the other side finance the war. The money goes to arm the enemies of the United States.
Right, so, and that's why Karzai has come out with a statement that they killed his brother, who was a drug dealer, and so was Karzai, by the way. But Karzai thought he was on the right side with America. That's why he's blowing the whistle, because he knows that you can't trust America, because you could, this week, it's like Breaking Bad, the miniseries on television and cable, DirecTV. This week you're on the right side, next week you're not, and you're dead. So that's how sneaky America is. We go and put in Morsi, spend out $1.3 billion in armaments we give in the military, and then a few weeks later we pull them because there's an uprising of civilian, secular, regular Egyptians that can't stomach the idea of Sharia law in an advanced, westernized country with an advanced culture that are having Christians killed, which is more than 10% of the population. By the way, that 10% owns probably 30 to 40% of the world, of the Egyptian economy, not 10%. And the military basically don't like the Muslim Brotherhood and have been keeping a cap on them for 60 years. So this whole idea that Obama is just going to race in there. And
the military in Egypt goes back to the Republican policy of Nasser. And it was Nasser who came in to try to break up the British control over Egypt. And it was Nasser who made a proposal for an alliance with Syria. And the important thing about Nasser, it's the same thing with Ataturk in Turkey, is that the military represented a secular force that wanted to develop the nation. And what the British want is they want these nations to be poor. They want these nations to have starving people who are subject to manipulation by imams and others who are on a payroll, to break these nations apart, to keep them from having any sovereignty. They want Egypt to be depopulated, to be a much smaller country that would largely be a country that would have servants for tourists. They've done everything they can to stop electrification in Egypt, to stop upgrading the agriculture. And I fear one mistake that this new regime might make in Egypt is if they continue to go along with the International Monetary Fund demands of austerity, they're going to have a popular uprising against the military. And so the good step of getting rid of the Muslim Brotherhood, because Morsi continued the policy of the IMF. That was the whole deal.
I'll tell you what I think. I think what will happen is you're going to see Obama's policy supporting them will end shortly, because he's going to be impeached. And he's already probably crossed the line already, and the Republicans do not want to support the Muslim Brotherhood. They know they're the enemy, except for idiots like McCain, out of the Alzheimer's unit on a day pass. Harley, we always talk solutions here on the program. I know sometimes people get to see Dr. Deagle in a rant like it was yesterday, but it's angry because people don't ask good questions. When they see the truth right in front of them, they pretend it's not there. But I tell people, don't get negative. Don't get down. Don't think, well, I can't do anything. I'm helpless. We're not helpless at all. In fact, that's the lie that the globalists want to tell us, the bankers. In fact, it's the exact opposite. We're in total control. And we don't even need a majority. We just need an active minority. What happens is there are what I call the initial adopters that follow us. If 0.1% of 1% decide to actually get a different view of things and have a vision. The early adopters are 3 to 5%. The secondary adopters, and by the way, at that point, the battle's already won. Because the things start moving, just like getting rid of GMO foods or fluoridated water, or putting in Glass-Steagall, or having a flat tax and getting rid of the IRS. Getting rid of lobbying in Washington, D.C., the District of Criminals. All of these things are actually pretty simple. They're not complicated. We could turn the economy around in America in less than a year if we just listened to even a few of the principles that Lyndon LaRouche has put forward, including NWAPA, building infrastructure, our credit system. There's really, really simple solutions that actually have historic, geopolitical, and financial roots to them, and references it so that it actually works.
Well, let me make a recommendation to your listeners if they want to get a sense of solutions and also a definition of the crisis. If you go on the LaRouchePAC.com website right now, there are two things I'd call your attention to. One is, it comes up on the main screen, is the conference we just had in San Francisco. And there were 3 panels, but the morning panel was primarily on, it was Mr. LaRouche, Mrs. LaRouche, and then a panel discussion on the food crisis and how to solve it. And then the afternoon panel was on the potential alliance, global alliance, if we initiate a second American Revolution, that is, if we come back to the principles of our Constitution and our Republic, that the United States would be joined very quickly by many other nations that want to get out of this crisis. And I gave a presentation in the second panel. You can take a look at that. And then in the third panel, we had a culture panel on how do you change the view of science and culture in this country away from the sickness of the so-called greenie agenda and the counterculture, which has really become the dominant culture, and instead go back to the idea where we actually look for the beauty in our fellow human beings and the beauty of human creativity. And by creativity, I don't mean smearing excrement on a wall and standing back and admiring it, which is what we have in art and music today, but instead where there's actually compositions designed to uplift and ennoble the human mind. And so it's on the website under LaRouchePAC.com under Schiller Institute Conference. Then the other thing is Lyndon LaRouche's 17-minute presentation on how Glass-Steagall and a credit system will destroy the bankers and restore our physical economy. And I
what
think
kind of bumps will we go through when this is put through? Because I heard another report this morning that there's going to be quote, further talk about, quote, the end of bailouts. This policy you're talking about has to be put in place as an alternative so people don't, quote, freak out, and we have secondary crashes of the economy, which, by the way, is by design. They actually have an endpoint of when they want to not only crash the system, but what they want to replace it with, which I believe is a biometric system where the banks get even more power, more assets, more control of resources, and more subservient, making the nations and the legislatures of every government on earth subservient to bankers' wills.
Well, you know, Barney Frank sold his bill in part as a way to end bailouts, and that's supposedly under Title II of the Dodd-Frank bill. But if you go to Title II of the Dodd-Frank bill and you actually read it, which very few congressmen did, it sets up under the idea of bank rationalization, or bank, the way to reorganize a bank, one of the too big to fail banks. It gives the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation the power to have banks steal the deposits to give them more money. And so instead of the standard way of a bank resolution, that's what it is, bank resolution, which the FDIC does now, where they sit down and say, how much are your assets, how much are your liabilities, if we keep you open, how much do we have to come up with to pay the depositors? You can do that with smaller banks. You can't do it with the too big to fail banks. What they're saying is that the too big to fail banks, and this is in Dodd-Frank, have a right to have a bail-in. So this is how Barney Frank is going to end the bailout, by having bail-ins. And what I said in my presentation in San Francisco is that with Glass-Steagall, we're not only going to have no bailouts and no bail-ins, but the only reference to the word bail will be what the bankers will have to post after they're indicted for criminal fraud.
Actually, I think what we should put is a two-letter word before the word bail. It means no bail.
Yeah, no bail out there.
I don't want to see them walking.
No bail.
No bail. I don't want to see them walking. I don't want to see them at the theater, at a restaurant, or anywhere outside the bars of their little cell. They need to have a concrete cell, a stainless steel toilet, and very little so they can't commit suicide.
Well, and they need to be given an opportunity to oversee their whatever's left of their fortune to go to help take care of the people who were fleeced by their banks.
Right. What we have is a criminal cadre that's transnational, that literally is now in the process of trying to complete a multi-step economic demolition of the world, not just America, but the entire world. And that demolition
it's
basically...
working. You know what happened in Greece just the other day? The IMF went in and they said, in order to get the 6.8 billion euros that's due to you as this next deposit, you have to commit yourself to further austerity. So the government said they're going to cut 12,500 civil service jobs. Now, that's with an unemployment rate already at 26% officially. So the government said they would do it. They shut down the national radio station, which is another 2,000 jobs in total. And in return, the IMF then went ahead and gave them 6.8 billion euros to cover a 2.2 billion euro payment that's due in August. What was the rest of the money for? It was to bail out German banks holding Greek debt. And why was that done? So that Merkel could get reelected in September, the German chancellor, because when she comes up for reelection, if she's continuing to bail out Greece, then she's going to be in trouble. So what did she do? She got the European Central Bank to draw upon funds that include money from Germany and other countries to give on Greek government account to the German and French and British banks. So the money never went to Greece, but now Greece owes that additional 6.8 billion euros because that's what the bailout is all about. So it's
isn't that amazing, though?
Before they take the deposits of Greek depositors.
You know, if you learn card tricks, which I learned a few, and my son's much better than I at this, the term in magic is called prestidigitation. So this is international bank prestidigitation. You don't see where their hands are moving. The money doesn't even touch or come within 1,000 miles of Greece, but they end up owing the debt? That's bizarre.
And the debt that they owe now is mostly false debt that was organized by Goldman Sachs working together with Mario Draghi to sell enough bonds to put money in the Greek banks so they would qualify to go into the euro in the first place. So it was a fraudulent debt offering based on a fraudulent policy that's designed to make money for the banks at the expense of the people of Greece.
Now, what's that saying about the making a deal with the devil? What's it called? It's called a Faustian deal.
Faustian deal, yeah.
So what this is they made a Faustian deal to haul Greece in who didn't qualify in the first place. It's like a poor person trying to mortgage $1 million home that can't service even the interest on the debt of the mortgage. Yet they get the mortgage anyway. Then afterwards, they pile on more debt because they're buried. Right from the start.
You could also call it robbing Peter and Paul to pay the emperor.
Oh, my. This kind of activity is criminal in its most extreme form. It's an abuse of everyone and every nation, and it needs to be an international crime, including those who collaborate with it, like Obama.
Well, join our Glass-Steagall fight, because that'll put an end to this.
Yeah, and the number to call is 800...
922-2907.
800-922-2907?
Yes.
Amazing. Back again next week for hour number 2, hour 3. Joel Skousen, World Affairs Brief Analyst. Stay tuned.